things that is not often recognized is that air wars produce fatalities that you don't see. When your comrades are shot down, they're gone. They just don't come back, and all you have to remember them by is an empty bunk. In my life, prior to Pearl Harbor, my best friend and I decided that we both wanted to fly, and that the best thing we could do, because once America got involved, we were definitely going to be asked to serve our country. But once America became involved, we would be called up. And we decided the smartest thing we could do, the coolest thing we could do, would be to go to Canada and learn to fly with the Royal Canadian Air Force. Get our wings, be commissioned, and then once America became involved, we could transfer to the Army Air Corps as it was then. And in grade, and we'd be a step ahead of all of our buddies. Smart? We thought so. So we applied, and were immediately accepted. They welcomed us with both arms, sent us applications, and we started filling out the applications and said, hey, you're underage, so you have to have parental consent. My buddy, my best friend in life, was an only child. His father had been brutally mustard gassed in the First World War and died a horrible death just after he was born. He was all his mother had. When he went home and told her what he wanted to do, she said, well, Sully, if you really feel that you must do this, you have my blessing. I naturally thought I could go home and get a similar response. When I told my mother what Mrs. Sullivan had done, she said, well, I hate to see you do this, but if you feel like you must, then okay, I'll support you. My father, however, had an entirely different take on it. He called us blithering idiots. That it was none of our business that Europe was embroiled in a war. None of our affair at all, and for me to get back into school. So I went back to my college. Sully went to Canada and was educated or trained on Spitfires and went through the North African campaign, survived it, and was posted back in England. Meanwhile, Pearl Harbor occurred. There was no question about parental consent. I was immediately offered the opportunity to volunteer, which I did for the Aviation Cadet Corps, and was accepted, and I went through my training and was immediately assigned to a heavy bomber group and sent to England. And we met in England. He came up to my base one day in his Spitfire, and I took him up to B-17 and flew him around, and I said, this is how we do it. And he said, Buster, you're just a truck driver. I said, well, the war needs truck drivers too. So he said, well, you've got to come down and visit me, and I'll introduce you to my Hawker Typhoon. The Hawker Typhoon was a vicious aircraft that he'd been transitioned to, that the British had, that was so overpowered. When it took off down the runway, in order to keep it straight, you had to keep full opposite rudder. About a month and a half later, I got free time and a skeleton crew, and I flew down to his base and squeezed this big, heavy 4-engine bomber into a fighter field, half the length of the runway, and had to stand on the brakes to keep from running off the end. And just off to the side, I noticed a wreckage. So I taxied up to the tower and they said, "What the hell are you doing here, Yank? Are you lost? You need petrol?" No, I'm just here on a social call to say hi to my best friend, Lieutenant Sullivan. And the OD said, "Well, you knew him?" And I said, "Well, of course, we were best friends, fraternity brothers." And he said, "Well, you have to see the CO." And I said, "Well, I know that's the protocol. When you land at a foreign base, you must report to the commanding officer and tell him why you're there. But I said, I'm in a real bit of a hurry. Could you just direct me to his quarters and I'll have to get back?" He said, No, you have to see the CO. So I was ushered into the office of a wing commander who was busy writing and didn't even look up. And I cleared my throat and looked up and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, sir, I'm just on a social call to say hi to my best friend, Lieutenant Sullivan." And he said, "You knew him?" And I said, "Yes, sir, we grew up together, we're fraternity brothers, and almost joined at the hip." And he said, "Did you see the wreckage when you landed?" And I said, "Yes, sir. We lost Sully yesterday afternoon on takeoff. Just as he and his wingmen were taking off in this typhoon with full opposite rudder, his engine quit and cartwheeled into the ground." He said, "I'm just notifying his mother and I want you to do it."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, sir, with all due respect, he was flying for the British, he wasn't flying for the Americans. And I think it's your responsibility." And he said, "Well, of course it is. But since you knew him and his mother knows you, I think she would appreciate getting the news more from you than from me." And so I sat down and cabled her that my dear friend Sully had been lost. That death, I came back to his burial and he had a full military funeral. But that loss was the most poignant and the most meaningful in my entire life. So the flag I planted today is for Flight Lieutenant Sully.
Wow.